Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the
We Got It podcast.
And we are so thrilled that you're here with us. You know, halfway through the game on Saturday, I wasn't quite sure if there was even going to be a podcast.
I think you said the podcast is canceled.
I don't even want to watch the second half. And you know what? We are in a very different mood than we thought we would be today, and I am very grateful for that. Before we dive into the incredible swing to grant us the victory in the game against Oregon on Saturday, I just want to give a little recap because I've realized that we've been doing this goofy "we got it" intro to our episodes pretty much since the podcast started. But it's been a while since we've updated or maybe introduced new listeners as to why we do that. So we need you to go back to episode 11 because you don't want to miss that episode. We were joined by the one and only, the great, the voice of Spartan men's basketball, Will Tiemann. And if you don't know who that is, go and listen to episode 11 and also do a little bit of history. Tune in to a Spartans men's basketball game on the radio. You will not be disappointed. I grew up listening to men's basketball. I think I still see the game better when I'm listening to it than when I'm actually physically watching it. But if you don't know Will Tiemann, there's that precious moment between when a player releases the ball from behind the three-point arc. If you've listened to him, you wait for that moment when the three ball goes in and he yells, "He got it! He got it!" And so when we started our podcast, that was just what came into my mind. That's the soul of Spartan sports, really, for me. And when we started thinking about like our angle of what we wanted this podcast to do, we really wanted it to be for all Spartan fans and to help you feel like we got it collectively as a Spartan family when it comes to Spartan sports. And so, yeah, just wanted to throw that back out there. I feel like that's an important thing. If you're listening to this episode and you're like, why are these weird people? Why are their voices cracking? What's happening here?
And I think with the He Got It and now the We Got It podcast, our goal is to kind of help Spartan fans in that moment where you may be not knowing what's going on, like when we're listening to a basketball game. Will Tiemann knows that he got it. And we want you to understand that when it comes to Spartan sports, you can have it too. Absolutely. We got it together and helping you understand, follow, know how to talk about, know how to kind of interact with Spartan athletics. So that's really the heart and soul behind why we do this podcast, the name behind it. But we wanted to kind of remind people because we know we have some new listeners who have been tuning in. So thank you for the support. The We Got It podcast is an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated, which is just great media outlet for all things Spartan sports, whether your sport is basketball, football, hockey, women's basketball, gymnastics, any of the above.
And if you're wondering where to find episode 11, so you can go listen to the incredible Will Tiemann share some stories from his time in broadcasting, all of our episodes are linked on their homepage. So another reason to check it out.
Exactly. As always, we like to get this out to more and more Spartan fans. So your support is awesome in doing that. So if you can give us a follow on Spotify or YouTube.
Leave a nice little review. That always helps.
Right.
Or a not nice review. I mean, we appreciate the nice ones, but
we'll take any feedback. Yeah.
You can also always reach out to us at the We Got It podcast at gmail.com if you have ideas for our We Got It covered segment of something that maybe you're interested in or confused about, or, hey, I think it'd be really awesome if you guys could highlight this. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the We Got It podcast. So, Jonah, there's a lot of ways that you could look at this last week of basketball. And, you know, I have learned something new about myself. Some might say that I am a little crazy when it comes to watching games. I have big mood swings. I would say that I am very in touch with my own emotions during Michigan State basketball games. Saturday, I was in my feels. We had some low lows, but we had some high highs.
We had the whole range or the whole spectrum of emotions on Saturday.
And thankfully, we ended on a high with Michigan State winning by 12 points at home to help bring Tom Izzo to tying Bobby Knight's Big Ten win record. We now look forward to Tuesday, where he's hopefully going to get to break that record. You couldn't set it up better against Indiana at home. As much as I absolutely hate losing both of our games in California, maybe this is just how it was meant to be.
I know. But before kind of the trip to Los Angeles, Dr. Green and White of Spartans Illustrated kind of broke down the percentage of what game was the most likely where he was going to break the record.
Yeah.
And he kind of broke down, like, there's a good chance that it could be
against the Indiana game.
Yeah. And really, like you said, obviously, we don't want to lose either of those games in LA. No. But you couldn't have asked for a more storybook opportunity to break this record against Indiana, the very coach that Bobby Knight coached at when he got this record. So it's going to be a great atmosphere at Breslin on Tuesday. We're excited to be able to be there, watch, hopefully witness that record being broken. But you couldn't write up this story better. Yes. But that's because they got the job done when it didn't necessarily seem like they were going to. Correct. Against Oregon on Saturday.
Correct. Yeah, to be completely honest, I had lost pretty much all hope at halftime. I mean, we've talked about this. Being in the Big Ten, you cannot go down by such a large deficit. Certainly not on the road, but it even felt like at home in the Breslin, it just wasn't going to happen. And I think a big part of that was the fact that you've just lost 2 on the road. You've come home. We expect you to come out and fix the mistakes that we saw against UCLA. These unforced turnovers, this lack of being able to lock in on defense. And it felt like maybe aside from the first 3 or 4 minutes of the first half, we were playing the same kind of ball that we played the first half in LA. And all of that in front of the 2000 champions who are in the building. If there was a time for us to step up and get it done, it felt like this moment is it. And I just felt like our guys did not come to play in that first half. And maybe I'm being a little harsh. Jase Richardson really had an incredible game the whole game. I don't know why he was sitting on the bench for maybe it wasn't actually as long, but it felt like he was on the bench for an eternity in the first half. But yeah, the boys got it done. So let's break it down. Yeah. Let's dive in. We might, draw some parallels between the Oregon game and the UCLA game. There were a few mistakes that continued to haunt us between those 2 games. What do you want to start with? Where do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it was a tale of 2 very different halves. Yeah. Michigan State allowed Oregon to hit their first 2 threes, was down right away, but then they were able to get some of that momentum back. Ended up being up, I think, like 22-19 or 18, something like that. It seemed like, okay, now they're trying to kind of get control in this game. But then really the wheels fell off for the Spartans on both sides of the ball. They were just allowing Oregon to get open 3 after open 3. It seemed like on back-to-back possessions that were really just back-breaking for the Spartans and weren't really putting up resistance on the defensive side of the ball. And then offensively, they weren't able to get really any rhythm going. Granted, credit to Oregon, they were really trying to shut down that play of pace that Michigan State likes to do, pushing the ball down the court. They were
forcing us into that half-court offense that they know we hate.
And it was working. Yeah. Michigan State was just not having any rhythm on offense, and they allowed 50 points in the first half, which I think they said in the broadcast was the most points that Michigan State had allowed in the first half of a basketball game since 2018. That's including some really good teams in 18 and 19 and 20.
Yeah.
And some not some great teams also in 21
right.
and 22
I think that's
and
more
23.
The important thing. Absolutely.
But really 6 seasons where they hadn't allowed that. And it kind of maybe seemed right before half, okay, like Michigan State's going to be down 11. Maybe there's a chance. But then Oregon made that with Jaxon Kohler in his face, that prayer of a shot at the buzzer to go up by 14. And at that moment, it really did kind of feel like the nail in the coffin. I know you could see visually Izzo's frustration. As soon as that shot goes up, he literally just smashes his clipboard onto the ground because Michigan State just couldn't get anything going on either end of the floor. They were down 50-36 at the half. I don't know what happened.
I know what happened. 21 of Oregon's points were off of MSU turnovers. 21 points off of turnovers. I mean, it was atrocious. And I think the worst part about it, and this was something that we saw in the UCLA game that I was furious over, was the amount of unforced turnovers, of us just having sloppy ball movement, of us not being locked in, of us not being in place where we ought to be. And those are the sort of things that are just like, how are we still doing this? You think like, okay, you got burned by it once against UCLA. We're not going to make that same mistake twice. And I think that's why I felt so hopeless after that first half, was we learned nothing from UCLA. And we've got everything going for us in this game, and we're still continuing to do this. Now, my father asked for a more upbeat podcast episode this week. So for those of you tuning in who are like, hey guys, we won on Saturday, cool it a little bit. We're about to get to all the good stuff. We gotta let it out. And you know what? There's gonna be these things where like we still want this team to make a run in March. The team that showed up in the first halves of the game against UCLA and against Oregon, I'm sorry, but if they show up again in March, we're not making it far. The teams that showed up really honestly in the second half of that UCLA game, as much as we lost that one and it still wasn't the outcome we wanted, the team stepped up incredibly in that second half. And then the team that showed up in the second half against Oregon, don't come near in March or you're getting schooled. Like that was absolutely a Tom Izzo team in that second half.
I know. I think Izzo said even after the game, that was probably one of the best halves of basketball that any of his teams have ever played. I love
hearing that. And he basically said, I don't give a you-know-what about the first half. It's over. Right. I care about that second half.
No, and that really was, I don't know what happened to switch that flip from the first and second half. I don't know if it was Tom that gave a speech. I don't know if it was a player that gave a speech.
I think Tom said he didn't say much anything at halftime. Like it was the boys that rallied and said, we are here to play for this crowd. We're here to play for these champions that are in the building. And we are getting Tom to this Bobby Knight record.
Absolutely. And that was literally just a clinic in the first half. And it was right from the get-go. I think they went on an 8-0 or 10-0
you mean the
run.
Second half?
Yeah, the second half, an 8 or 10-0 run to start. And then immediately 3 minutes into the half, what seemed like the nail in the coffin seemed like, oh man, we're back in this. We have to continue to play like this. And I really felt like going in the second half that Michigan State was going to have to play a near perfect half to even have a chance to come back in this game. And they did.
And let's talk about how near perfect that was. Oregon had 24 points in that second half compared to 50 in the first half. And 12 of those points came from the charity line. They made 6 baskets in the entire second half that were not free throws. And I think a huge part of that was the fact that we stopped doubling in the paint and actually stayed out on the perimeter and stopped giving them wide open threes.
Right. I know Oregon, I think, was like 8 of 12 from 3 in that first half. They were 0 for 8 in the second half from threes.
Different.
I think they cooled down.
Right.
But also Michigan State wasn't allowing so many open shooters.
We made it so much harder for them.
Exactly. And they were actually being in good defensive positions. And I think that really started with Jaden Akins and Frankie Fiddler.
Yes.
They both just locked in defensively. They were securing defensive rebounds and weren't allowing Oregon to really combat Michigan State's run outside maybe a couple minutes where we got it to 2 or 3 and then they got it back out to 8 or 9. But then after that, it was all MSU. And it started on the defensive side of the ball. That defensive effort that we really saw that first half of the Minnesota game a couple of weeks ago, where it just seemed like they were giving Oregon everything they could handle, making everything hard for them, which again was then opening up easy opportunities for Michigan State to get back in this game and not only win, but win by 12 points. And like we said, obviously Michigan State turned it around offensively in the second half, scoring 50 points, but only allowing 6 baskets in the second half was massive.
The referees are the only reason that kept Oregon even somewhat in that second half.
Yeah, them getting to the line and having some of those shots and maybe some of those questionable calls. I know Izzo got teed up because of one of those questionable calls, which really was, I think, the turning point in the game that really made this game. Michigan State go on another run to get it back within 2 or 3 points, and then it was kind of over at that point.
I feel like when Tom gets teed up, I mean, you always like to keep things as civil as you possibly can, but I feel like when Tom gets teed up, it's not because he's just throwing a hissy fit. It's because there is a real reason going on. It was just some of the most chaotic refereeing I have ever seen in a game. Both directions. I mean, both directions. I do feel like a lot of it went against Michigan State at times, but I think Matt Sheehan said it best on Twitter. Like, somebody check those guys' FanDuel accounts because this is just wild.
And I'll be honest, when Izzo got teed up, I was kind of actually frustrated with him because at that point, Oregon had gotten fouled, so they're about to shoot 2 free throws, and they got 2 more. So it was a 4-point game.
With our emotions over here,
which turned into an 8-point game. I was like, man, we were finally coming back, and then this happens. But really, that flipped another switch for Michigan State. I think it ignited
a fire under those guys.
And they went on to an 8-0 run right after that to tie the game. And like I said, it was kind of over at that point. Michigan State had all the momentum, and they were able to kind of coast through the end of the game thanks to some miraculous offensive basketball by Jase Richardson.
Absolutely. I think there's 2 players that we need to highlight in addition to, yes, Frankie Fiddler and Jaden Akins showed up in ways in that second half that I haven't seen either of them show up in the last week and a half. I mean, they just were everywhere all at once. And huge credit to Jaden Akins. I still need him to show up and have a little bit more consistency to get back on my nice list.
Fair enough.
He's still on the naughty list right now. But Jaxon Kohler with a double-double, 14 points, 12 rebounds. That kid never stops hustling.
His motor
and as much as I wanted to throttle him for the travel at the end of the UCLA game, I think he made up for it on Oregon. I've forgiven him. It's okay. And then let's please talk about Jase freaking Richardson. I don't have words.
It was
Please go.
I was actually texting a buddy throughout this game, and we were talking about the performance from Jase Richardson in that second half, really throughout the whole game.
Yeah.
But it was almost like a spiritual experience. I know I might get in trouble for saying that, but it was just unreal watching the way that he was taking over the game. It wasn't just like he was hitting open kick-out threes. He was driving to the basket, having defenders on skates, going up and under around defenders.
With definition of threading the needle, you look it up. It's that, you know what I'm talking about if you watch the game. It is that sequence where Jase Richardson breaks the guy's ankles twice, I swear, driving to the hoop, goes over, goes under, goes around, and back up. I mean, just absolute. It was a symphony. It was just like I could hear the violins playing. I could hear the cellos crash. I mean, it was just like amazing.
And with his dad and all of his teammates from the 2000 national championship team in the first row going crazy, hugging each other.
Richardson's reaction was just priceless. Absolutely. And I hope that Jase carries that with him for the rest of his life. He also broke his dad's own career record.
Yeah.
Jason Richardson, the most points he had in the game was 25, and Jase got 29. Now, for those of you who remember when we had Matt Sheehan on back in December, I think we played a little game of Hot or Not, and one of our hot takes was, will Jase Richardson drop 30 points in a game? And the way that Jonah and I were yelling and cheering at the TV, especially at the end when they were trying to foul, we were like, foul Jase, foul Jase. And you know what? I'm going to say that 29 is close enough. It was not a hot take. He did it.
And too, that moment when he had 27 points and he just pulls up for 3. I was just sure that was going to go in.
I thought so too.
And I would have gone absolutely berserk if it did. Yes. But anyways, Jase Richardson.
No doubt, player of the week, player of the game. Even though he did not have a great game against UCLA, he more than, again, like Jaxon Kohler, more than made up for it against Oregon. Let's talk a little bit about that 3-point shooting, though. So I know Jase missed that one, but against UCLA, and I don't have the exact stats from that game, but against Oregon as well, you know, when the other team is constantly draining threes, it makes it feel like, man, we're missing everything. But we were 8 for 18 from behind the arc, which won so many more threes than we've been shooting. Still a lot less than what other teams are shooting. Right. But that's if I'm not mistaken, a 44% from the 3-point arc shooting percentage. We were 50% from the field overall, and we were 88% from the free throw line. Those are stats that win games.
Yes, and those are stats where if Michigan State continues to shoot from the free throw line like they've shot all season,
and can add the 3-ball.
If they're shooting 40%
Ooh,
from behind the arc,
look out.
Look out in March, because this team is going to be tough to beat. Not to mention, we were without our starting point guard and maybe our best perimeter defender in Jeremy Fears and Xavier Booker. And we are still able to have that kind of performance in the second half and really run away with this game at not full strength.
Absolutely. And on the one hand, I feel like I'm a little fickle because at half, I said, I don't care that we have Jeremy Fears and Xavier Booker out. We should not be losing this game this badly right now. But then, of course, when we win, I'm like, hey, we did it without Fears. We did it without Booker.
I mean, it was...
you got to have it both ways.
Totally two opposite.
Yes.
Where you allow 50 points in one half, then you score 50 points in the next, and only allow 24 points.
And I mean, if I'm not mistaken, if I can do my math correctly, we ended up winning by 12 points. We were down 14 at half. That's a 26-point swing.
Yeah.
Swing in 20 minutes of basketball. I mean, it was just phenomenal. We had the opportunity. We live over an hour away from the Breslin Center. About 60 minutes before the game, we had someone message us saying they had free tickets. And we had this moment where we looked at each other and we were like, do we try to make it happen? Like, I was about to hop in the shower. Like, what? I don't know. We decided against it. And again, at halftime, I looked at Jonah and go, aren't you so glad we didn't go to the Breslin Center? And then about 5 minutes left in the second half, he goes, still glad we didn't go to the Breslin Center.
I know.
And there is that moment, that feeling of FOMO, because apparently for some fans there, it was the loudest they've ever heard the Breslin Center. I'm hoping we can make it even louder on Tuesday night when Tom breaks that record. But pretty fantastic. Honestly, for anybody who could be there.
I don't know if my heart could have handled being there in person. I could barely. I was scaring the dogs with how loud I was cheering and reacting.
Having to apologize.
Yes.
They looked so scared.
But that's the game that we were really, actually, look at the end result, looking for from the Spartans coming after those 2 losses to LA, kind of maybe questioning, does this team have what it takes to win a Big Ten championship? And at halftime, it seemed like maybe they don't.
Yeah.
Maybe this easy schedule to start and hard schedule to end is really going to bite us. And it still could.
Yeah.
But I think that Michigan State showed in the second half that they do have what it takes to contend for a Big Ten championship. And they're going to be contending late into February and into March.
And I would argue that that team now shows that they have it far more than if they had just gone in and dominated in that Oregon game. Like the ability to dig deep and to fix that many mistakes from the first half, the turnovers, the poor defense, and to be able to lock that in and completely flip the script, I think that shows, hey, maybe this is a team that can be unselfish. Hey, this is a team that can show up for their teammates when they need to. And I think big ways that maybe I'm not necessarily always giving credit to Jaden Akins for is the way that he showed up in the second half of the UCLA game and the Oregon game. He didn't put up big numbers, but the impact of him on the court, especially defensively, is what allowed Jase to go off in that Oregon game. It's, what allows other players to be able to get more of like the stat line glory. And we've talked about it with Will Tiemann. Another reason to go back and listen to episode 11 with him is that this team overall, at its heart, I think it's a very unselfish team that does care about winning far more than any personal glory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing to really take away from this game in a positive way is the last 3 games, these teams have really taken 2 approaches to Michigan State defensively. They have tried so hard to slow down Michigan State's ability to push the ball by getting a defender on the ball carrier right away, getting in passing lanes, but then also kind of contesting the paint and making Michigan State shoot.
Not just contesting, I mean clogging it up. I think we saw that, against USC. We talked about that, of how they were playing this almost like weird man zone. But then things that UCLA and Oregon did as well. I swear almost every single one of their defenders had a foot in the paint at all times. I mean, that's what it felt like, at least until we started actually hitting some threes. And Jase still made things happen in the paint, even though there were so many guys there. Did that finally start opening up? But especially that first half, it was almost impossible to get things going in the paint.
Right, and I know you brought it up that Michigan State didn't make a layup in that first half.
Oh my goodness. And a big part of that, and I think this is where we really felt the pangs of not having Jeremy Fears Jr. in For those of you who've been listening all season, you heard me griping about, early like November, December, Jeremy, how I really wanted him to be more decisive with the ball. It felt like so many times he was driving in just past the charity line, looking like he's going towards the hoop, and then just stopping or dishing it out in a very, poor pass. And he's improved in that so much, just the confidence in himself. Like we've seen him be so much more decisive towards the hoop, which is massive when you're playing fast-paced basketball. I think on the one hand, we often say like, oh, you just got to get in there and make things happen. But if you don't have a decision or know what you're doing going into that paint, it's really easy to get forced turnovers there. And I think we saw that happening to Trey. If I had $1 for the number of times that he drove in past the 3-point line and stopped on that Big Ten logo, I could go buy a lot of Taco 12 packs. I just kept being like, Trey, please, please, please have a decision going in there. And I think we started to clean up some of that in the second half as well. And a big part of that was Jase. He was just so decisive in that area of the court.
And that's what I think the answer that Michigan State had is teams have been forcing Michigan State to succeed in the half-court offense. And in order for that really to happen, you either need to have a great shooting team, which Michigan State has been improving the last couple of games, but they also have this guy now in Jase Richardson who proves that he can kind of make things happen on his own. And that's really, outside of maybe some moments from Jaden Akins, something that this team has been missing all season long. And if now they have this answer of this guy they can go to when teams are trying to shut certain aspects of Michigan State down, it gives them options to go to when that's not working, when that's not available. And that's going to make Michigan State be able to be in these games against better opponents now in this late part of the season. I don't know. It's going to be a really tough call for Tom Izzo, I think, having Jase come off the bench now for the rest of the season. And I think there's going to be some tough decisions to see what kind of lineups he brings out to start games, what bench units he has.
Yeah. I don't know. Part of me thinks he'll just keep doing his same thing and not shrink the lineup. And, maybe it'll keep working. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But overall,
I have whiplash from this week. I have whiplash from this conversation. Part of me is still mad about the poor performances. But I think what I'm taking away from this week more than anything is just that I think we are showing that we have the grit. And I was really starting to doubt that after the lackluster performances at UCLA and then that first half at the Breslin Center. But I think these guys are out here to prove me wrong specifically, right? Get that chip on their shoulder. And again, I think sometimes the Spartans play best when we are in that between a rock and a hard place kind of position. And not that I want that to continue for the rest of the season, but I hope for them that they've proven it to themselves now, right? Hey, we can do this. We can be in these hard situations. And Oregon is no one to bat your eyes at. They have the most quad one wins behind Auburn. And I'm just so pleased about that win.
Yeah, they're a good team. I mean, obviously haven't been playing super well. Lately they've lost some games.
Same thing about us.
But I'm going to take that win every time. I think Michigan State going into the game was 8-point favorite, ended up winning by 12, so covered the spread even in that game somehow.
I'll have to look this up and see who posted it, but there was something that I saw on Blue Sky that someone said, some people's teams win. Some people's teams cover the spread. My team goes down 14.5 and then still covers the spread. And I was like, that is phenomenal. And I think that sums it up of that's my team. And I hope that continues to be our team for the rest of the season.
Yeah, not only they can now have shown they can overcome that poor start. And you kind of started to see glimpses of that against UCLA. They almost came back. Yeah. They had the lead, but then they finally gets it done against Oregon and really runs away with that game. And I think gets some momentum for now. The last 5 games in February are all against ranked teams, 3 of which are on the road. So they're going to have to show up. They're going to have to dig deep in order to stay in this Big Ten race. But they're here.
They're and now they know they can.
Yeah, they know they can.
Well, we're going to stop yapping about this week's matchups. Please don't go anywhere, though. We've got some halftime updates for you, where all of Spartan sports stand this week. And then we've also got a quick We Got It Covered segment, breaking down defensive positioning a little bit more. Welcome back to the We Got It halftime show. I'm going to turn it over to our analyst, Jonah, to get us caught up on what happened with the hockey and women's basketball games this week.
Yeah, so both men's hockey and women's basketball took on Michigan this weekend.
Boo.
The men's hockey team took on Michigan on Friday night at Munn Ice Arena, and unfortunately fell to the Wolverines 2-1 in a pretty close game that was kind of plagued by some penalties by Michigan State. But on Saturday, they were able to totally flip the script at Little Caesars Arena at the duel in the D against Michigan, and absolutely ran over Michigan with the Zamboni bad at Little Caesars Arena, and they beat Michigan 6-1, just totally running away with it and getting the split on the season with Michigan 2 games, still in great position in the Big Ten standings and nationally. For women's basketball, wasn't quite the result that we were hoping for, even though they had beaten Michigan on the road pretty decisively earlier in the season. Ended up falling to the Wolverines 71-61 at the Breslin. So disappointing loss, but plenty of time for the women's team to bounce back this season.
I don't like these splits with U of M. I don't like that we've split both hockey weekends with Michigan. I don't like that we've split the women's basketball games. The boys better not split with Michigan. We're going to go to Chrysler Arena. We're going to take them down, and we're also going to take them down at the Breslin Center.
Yeah.
It's happening. In more positive news, the women's gymnastics team took on number 16 Minnesota at home at Jennison Fieldhouse and came away with the W. Our women's gymnastics teams just continue to dominate, and I'm here for it every single week.
Absolutely.
So that's your update on Spartan sports. Don't go anywhere as we get things wrapped up with a nice little We Got It Covered segment.
So for this week's We Got It Covered segment, there were some points in this Oregon game, especially in the first half, that kind of really getting me frustrated, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Yes.
And a lot of that had to do, in my opinion, with Michigan State's kind of positional and rotational defense and the kind of instances where they were choosing to maybe double a guy in the paint and kind of sag off their man, which was then allowing Oregon to get open three after open three. So we wanted to kind of spend some time talking about maybe some of the reasons behind those decisions and maybe some things that a defense can do to combat that when your approach isn't working.
Yeah, and it was something that we definitely were able to fix between the first half to the second half. I mean, we basically gave Oregon no open looks from the 3-point line in the second half. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about, like, what do you think that Michigan State did to change that? So essentially, from my understanding, and we were kind of breaking it down, like, especially during timeouts or commercials, we'd go back and look at, like, why is this guy wide open? And so many times it was because our two big men were starting to double in the paint.
Right.
What is, like, the rationale, or when are times when you would want to double? Like, how do you go about doing that in a way where you aren't just leaving someone open on the perimeter?
Yeah, I think there's a couple explanations to that. I think to start off, I think it was kind of clear that Michigan State was making a pretty obvious effort to double the post when Oregon got into the paint. And I think they kind of started doing that because, kind of like Michigan State, Oregon isn't or hasn't been a great 3-point shooting team this season.
No, I think they're like 250th-ish in the country. They make like 7 threes a game.
And for Michigan State, I think they were maybe okay with Oregon taking more threes. But when you double the paint, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be allowing all these wide open
absolutely
threes.
Uncontested shots.
So when Oregon was getting the ball in the paint, usually a secondary defender who was close to the guy in the paint would kind of leave their man and try to double the paint, making life hard for whoever that big man was.
Trying to force a turnover, trying to force a dish out, poor pass, all that
tough
stuff.
Shot.
Yeah.
And in that instance, Michigan State wasn't really doing anything else on the other defensive positions to kind of counteract leaving a man open. And it's kind of hard to kind of explain it in a podcast, but simply, the other three guys who aren't doubling can't just remain
Someone
guarding.
has to switch and cover.
And so with that, you kind of have to rotate your whole defense. you have to have that guy who's maybe 2 passes away
Yes.
step up on that man in order to make that pass. Maybe the open guy now is through 2 guys.
Yes.
Instead of being just an open
That
chest
immediate
pass
dish
to the wing or to the corner.
Yes.
And that's what was happening
Oh my
really,
goodness.
especially in that first
Every
half.
single time.
So for Michigan State, they have to be better at rotating. The principle of doubling, I think, is a good
Yeah.
thing to do, especially against a team that's not
a great
a great
three-point
shooting
Yeah.
team. But you have to make life actually hard, too, for that man in the paint.
And this is something that I don't feel like we've seen too much outside of this Oregon game. And my mind immediately kind of draws the conclusion of like, okay, what else is correlated with this, right? We're missing Jeremy Fears, who is probably one of the most vocal players on the court, who you said, I think, sets up our defense, sets up our offense. Like, I have to imagine that missing his voice, let alone just his eyes on the court, probably led to some of that disruption and the lack of rotation or the lack of stepping up on that perimeter shooter.
Absolutely. I think that was a huge reason. I think not only is he the most vocal, but I think he's the most active on defense as well. And usually would be that guy who would kind of rotate and make that easy pass or take that easy pass away from the big man. Now, I think the other thing that Michigan State didn't exactly do super well when doubling the paint is when you double the paint, you have to really fully commit and sell out to doubling the paint, where it's making that kind of pass out back to the perimeter
very difficult to do. You're actually shutting down that passing lane.
And they weren't doing that. They were allowing that pass just to be easy back out to the perimeter, and that guy was uncovered. It was like this
half-hearted doubling combined with a lack of rotation or picking up that free man now.
Exactly. And when you do that, when you kind of half are doubling the paint, kind of half,
you're getting caught in no man's land.
Getting caught in no man's land, and you're not really doubling that guy in the paint, so you're making it easy for him to dish it back out, and you're leaving your guy open for a 3. Yeah. And that was really what was burning Michigan State over and over again. Is Oregon was hot. They hit, I think they were 8 for 12 in the first half from 3, and pretty much every single one of those shots that they attempted from behind the arc were wide open shots. It kind of was different. It felt like in that USC and UCLA game that those teams were making a lot of contested threes.
Hand or 2 hands in their face.
End of shot clock as it was expiring. Just like, oh, come on, are you serious? Like, we played good defense on that possession, and they just made a shot. Kind of like that buzzer beater that Oregon made. To end.
That was one of the only contested 3-pointers in the whole half.
And I think, you saw Michigan State not having Jeremy Fears really have, not only, like you said, an impact on the offensive side of the ball, but really have that impact, especially in that first
specific scenario too. So then what do you think Michigan State did in the second half? Because we didn't magically get Jeremy Fears back. Do you think that we improved on our rotation? I feel like we stopped doubling. I feel like there was only one possession where we doubled and the guy had a wide open 3 and thankfully he missed it. And then I remember yelling, being like, stop doubling and doing this. And then I didn't really see it happen the whole rest of the half.
Yeah, I don't think Michigan State did it near as much in the second half. And I think it's partly because neither of Oregon's big men
had been a threat really inside.
They weren't doing a whole lot in the post. And I think they kind of realized, Michigan State, that they can trust Kohler or Zapala or Cooper to kind of guard that man one-on-one. But also, when they were doubling, I think they were actually fully committing to that double and not making that easy pass for the big man. If the big man wanted to pass, he had to kind of pass it across the court, allowing Michigan State's defense more time to kind of get to the ball.
And or
adjust.
Pick off that pass. I think that was helpful for me to even just think through like what goes on behind the decision making and what does it all take? Because I think we talk about these terms that we've talked about it before, like setting picks, setting screens. Like, how do you actually set up this offense and this defense? And then when you see something go wrong, to be able to analyze and break down, like, why is it not working? And I think, again, Jeremy Fears being out was a huge part of that. But I think it shows that, hey, we have to be able to have this same level of communication, especially with the large rotation that we have. We can't just rely on Jeremy to be the voice of reason on defense. And we need all of our guys to be in communication with each other. And I think that's something that overall this season we've done really well. And I hope that we just learned that aspect in this game and can carry it with us forward again.
Absolutely. I think because Michigan State I don't think their game plan necessarily to start doubling the
Right.
paint was the wrong decision. It was more the execution
Mhm.
of that. But then also they were able to kind of adjust to how Oregon was playing in order to make that huge swing in the second half.
Which is just such a show of maturity to be able to correct those kind of mistakes in game.
Yeah, and that's really what wins and loses games in college basketball, how close some of these games is how can you adjust in the thick of it, not necessarily in between games, but in game in order to make those adjustments to end up with victories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, I think we could just keep talking about this week for good and for bad for a very long time, but I think we will end things there. Thank you for all of you who are tuning in with us on this slightly chaotic ride today. We appreciate it. We're hoping that we are back next week with just 2 solid victories under our belt after we face Indiana at home, and then we take on Illinois on the road, which we know that's never going to be easy. But we are looking forward to another week of Spartan basketball, and we appreciate you all tuning in. Go Green.
Go White.
Go State.